Bring her to me.
The Alpha King's voice was quiet, but every wolf in Frost Hollow heard the warning beneath it. Caleb Sterling stood at the head of the great hall with one hand resting beside a single sheet of paper. The royal shipment record in front of him said Frost Hollow had received enough winter medicine to supply every child in the path. The report submitted by Alpha Marcus Vale claimed barely a third had arrived. Someone had lied, and one name appeared beneath the message and had brought Caleb across the mountains before sunrise. Grace Miller. Caleb lifted his steel-gray eyes toward Marcus.
Where is she?
Marcus offered, the polished smile of a man who had practiced looking innocent.
Grace is an Omega assistant in our infirmary, Your Majesty. She became ill last night. I did not think someone of her condition should disturb a royal hearing.
Something in Caleb's expression changed. Not anger, not yet.
She sent evidence directly to my court?
Accused this pack of hiding crown supplies. And now she is suddenly too ill to speak? Marcus opened his mouth. Caleb did not give him the chance. Bring Grace Miller to me. Now. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and destiny, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us love finds the broken. Now, back to Grace. The royal guards disappeared through the side doors. Silence settled over the hall. Caleb noticed how no one looked at Marcus. Even stranger, no one asked why Grace had vanished. 5 minutes passed. Then the doors opened again. Caleb turned, expecting a frightened witness. Instead, his entire body went still. Grace Miller stood between two guards, although stood was generous. She looked exhausted, as if the simple act of keeping her feet beneath her required everything she had left. Chestnut hair had fallen loose around her pale face. One side of her lip was swollen. Dark marks circled her wrists. Her dress was dusty and torn near one shoulder, and she kept her arms close to herself as though trying to disappear inside what remained of it. Caleb's fingers tightened around the silver cup beside him. A thin crack split down its side. The wolves nearest the throne stiffened as his dominance rolled through the room. Marcus stepped forward. Your Majesty. She resisted when my men questioned her, and Caleb looked at him. I did not ask you. 3 words. Nothing more. Marcus stopped speaking. Caleb walked toward Grace, slowly, carefully. Yet when he came within a few feet of her, Grace took one instinctive step backward. Caleb stopped. That movement struck him harder than the bruises. She was not retreating because he had threatened her. She was retreating because someone had taught her that powerful men approaching meant she should be afraid. His wolf pushed beneath his skin, furious, demanding answers he did not yet have. Caleb forced it down. Barely. He lowered his voice. Grace. Her hazel eyes finally lifted to his. Who did this to you? For several seconds, she said nothing. Then her gaze moved past his shoulder. Caleb followed it. Grace was staring directly at Marcus Vale, and for the first time since entering Frost Hollow, Caleb saw something crack beneath the local alpha's perfect composure. Fear. Not fear of the king. Fear of the bruised Omega standing before him. Grace knew that look on Marcus Vale's face. She had seen it 2 days earlier, before the bruises, before the locked cellar, before the king ever set foot inside Frost Hollow. It had begun with the child burning with fever. Clara Hayes was only 8, small enough that her feet barely reached the end of the infirmary cot. She lay beneath 2 wool blankets, cheeks flushed, light brown hair damp against her forehead. Grace pressed a cool cloth beneath Clara's chin and tried not to let the girl see her worry. You promised me soup, Clara whispered. Grace managed to smile. And you promised me you would stop pretending you hate carrots. Clara made a weak face. I never promised that. The joke should have made Grace laugh. Instead, she looked toward the medicine cabinet. She had already checked it twice. Fever tonic. Empty. Willow extract. Empty. Even the emergency shelf held nothing but clean bandages and 3 bottles of antiseptic. Grace found the head healer sorting linens in the back room. "Where is the new shipment?" she asked. The older woman avoided her eyes. "It never arrived." Grace stopped. 3 days earlier, while gathering herbs near the South Road, she had watched 2 Crown wagons roll through the main gate. Both carried the Silverwolf seal of the Northern Crown. One driver had even asked her for directions to the storage yard. "It did arrive," Grace said quietly. The healer's hands froze over a folded sheet. "Grace?" There was warning in her voice now. "Leave it alone. Clara needs medicine, then keep her cool and pray the fever breaks." Grace stared at her. "There were children's medicines on those wagons." The woman finally looked up, and what Grace saw in her face was not ignorance, it was fear. "Some questions cost more than they are worth." Grace returned to Clara with a knot tightening beneath her ribs. That afternoon, she went to Marcus Vale herself. He received her in the council wing without offering her a chair. Marcus listened while she explained Clara's fever and the missing supplies. When Grace finished, he leaned back and studied her as though she were asking for a personal favor. "Royal supplies are distributed according to need. She is 8 years old, and Frost Hollow has limited resources. The Crown sent those resources for children like her." Marcus's expression cooled. "You are an assistant healer, Grace, not a quartermaster. Remember the difference? She left with nothing at sunset." The daily omega tonic was passed through the infirmary, as it had been every evening since Grace was 16. The liquid was bitter, metallic beneath the herbs meant to hide its taste. She swallowed it without thinking. Everyone had been told the tonic helped low-ranking wolves remain calm and balanced. Grace had never questioned that either, until now. After midnight, when the infirmary finally grew quiet, Grace wrapped her cloak around her shoulders and crossed the storage yard alone. Snow had begun to dust the rooftops. The main warehouse stood dark, but one side door had not fully latched. Grace slipped inside. The air smelled of wood, dried grain, and something medicinal. She moved between stacked crates until the moonlight from a high window caught a silver mark. Grace stopped breathing. A crown seal. She brushed dust from the lid. Printed across the front were 4 words that made her blood run cold. Children's fever medicine. The crate had never been opened. Grace kept one hand on the unopened crate and listened. Nothing. Only the faint groan of timber as winter wind pressed against the warehouse walls. She should have taken the medicine and left. Clara needed it. Every instinct in her told her to open the box, carry what she could back to the infirmary, and ask questions later. But another thought stopped her. If one shipment had been hidden, there might be others. Grace lifted her lantern and moved deeper between the rows of crates. Royal seals appeared everywhere. Blankets, dried food, medical supplies, enough to help half the families Marcus claimed Frost Hollow could no longer support. Yet none of it had reached the people who needed it. At the rear of the warehouse, Grace found a narrow door marked Records. Omegas were forbidden inside. She hesitated only once before trying the handle. It opened. The room beyond was small and cold, lined with shelves of account books. Grace searched until she found a black leather ledger without a title. The first pages looked ordinary. Deliveries, storage counts, distribution notes. Then the numbers changed. Grace compared a royal shipment entry with the crates outside. The Crown had sent 40 cases. Marcus had reported 12. Another entry showed winter blankets transferred to a neighboring territory for private payment. A third listed medicine sold under a merchant code. Grace felt sick.
Then she noticed the names written beside several older discrepancies. Low-ranking wolves, mostly Omegas. People she remembered leaving Frost Hollow suddenly. People who had supposedly chosen better lives elsewhere. Grace no longer believed that explanation. She could not take the ledger. Marcus would know immediately. So she found scrap paper, sat on the cold floor, and copied shipment numbers, dates, merchant codes, and amounts. Her fingers shook, but her handwriting stayed clear. She made 2 copies. One she folded small enough to hide inside her sleeve, the other she tucked into her pocket. Before leaving, Grace returned the ledger exactly where she had found it. She carried 1 bottle of fever medicine back to the infirmary and gave Clara the proper dose. By dawn, the child was still sick, but her breathing had eased. That was enough to give Grace courage. She waited until the kitchen fires were lit and the courtyard began to fill with workers. Then she slipped behind the old stable where messenger birds were kept. Grace wrote only what the crown needed to know. Royal supplies were being hidden. Shipment records did not match deliveries. Frost Hollow children were going without medicine. She signed her real name, Grace Miller, Frost Hollow Infirmary. She tied the message to a crown-trained bird and released it into the gray morning sky. Then she returned to her room, took the second copy of the ledger, threaded a needle, and carefully stitched the folded paper inside the hem of her dress. No pocket, no drawer, no place Marcus would think to search first. Grace had just finished the final stitch when something moved beyond her window, across the courtyard, beneath the stable roof. Ryan Cross stood perfectly still. His eyes were not on Grace. They were following the messenger bird, disappearing over the northern trees. Ryan Cross did not confront Grace in the courtyard. That frightened her more. He simply watched the messenger bird vanish beyond the northern trees, then turned and walked toward the council wing. By late morning, Grace was summoned to Marcus Vale's office. The black ledger sat nowhere in sight, but Marcus did not need it. Ryan stood near the door with his arms folded. Marcus remained behind his desk, calm enough to make Grace's stomach tighten. "You sent a message," he said. Grace kept her hands still at her sides. "I sent a request for help." "To the crown. Children are sick." Marcus leaned back. "You entered a restricted warehouse. You accessed records that do not concern you. Now you are accusing your alpha of theft?" Grace thought of Clara beneath the blankets. She thought of unopened medicine sitting less than 200 yards from the infirmary. "I am asking where the supplies went." Marcus studied her for several seconds. Then he pushed a sheet of paper across the desk. "Sign this." Grace looked down. The statement claimed she had entered the warehouse to steal medicine and had invented accusations when discovered. Her throat went dry. "That is not true." "Truth is often a matter of who is believed." Marcus folded his hands. "You are an Omega assistant?" "I am the Alpha of Frost Hollow." Grace looked at the confession again. "I will not sign it." For the first time, Marcus's polite expression disappeared. "By afternoon." Grace stood in the packed square before dozens of wolves she had treated, fed, comforted, or sat beside through long nights in the infirmary. Marcus announced that she had stolen crown medicine. No one challenged him. Some stared at the ground. Others stepped farther away from her. Grace understood then how power protected itself. Not because everyone believed the lie, because too many people were afraid to question it. "Confess," Marcus said. Grace lifted her head. "The king will ask where the medicine went." A murmur moved through the square. Marcus came closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "The king will never see you." Grace was taken to an old storage cellar beneath the warehouse complex. Hours passed. Ryan questioned her about the message, the records, and whether she had copied anything. Grace gave him nothing. He searched her pockets. Empty. He searched the small room assigned to her near the infirmary. Nothing. The page sewn inside the hem of her dress remained untouched. By evening,
Grace was exhausted, her wrists sore from being held too tightly during a long confinement, her clothes dusty from the cellar, but her secret was still safe. Then a sound rolled through Frost Hollow, one deep horn, then another. Royal horns. Ryan froze outside the cellar door. Voices erupted above them. Boots crossed the warehouse floor. The king had arrived early, much earlier than Marcus expected. Grace closed her eyes for one brief second. Her message had reached him. Upstairs, Marcus rushed to greet Caleb Sterling and claimed Grace had fallen ill during the night. Caleb listened without interrupting. Then he placed Grace's letter beside the official shipment records and looked directly at Marcus. Something in the room changed. The king had already found the first lie, and now he wanted the woman who had written the truth. Grace stood in the great hall with every eye on her, but the only face she could truly see was Marcus Vale's. His confidence was gone. Not completely, just enough for her to notice. Caleb Sterling noticed too. He moved closer, slow enough not to startle her, yet Grace still felt her body tense. The king stopped at once. His steel-gray eyes dropped to her wrists, then to the swelling near her lip. The pressure in the room changed. Wolves along the walls lowered their gazes. Ryan Cross shifted his weight near Marcus, suddenly very interested in the floor. Caleb's voice remained controlled. "Who did this to you?" Grace tried to answer, but years of obedience tightened around her throat. Marcus had taught everyone in Frost Hollow the same lesson. Alphas spoke, Omegas endured. Caleb waited. He did not rush her. He did not reach for her. That patience gave Grace enough room to breathe. Marcus stepped forward. "Your Majesty," she became disruptive during questioning. "My enforcer only restrained her because she refused to cooperate." Caleb turned his head. "I did not ask you." Marcus stopped. The silence that followed felt sharper than shouting. Caleb looked back at Grace. "I am asking you." Grace swallowed. "Ryan Cross questioned me." Ryan lifted his head. "She is twisting what happened." Caleb's eyes flashed amber gold for 1 second. "You will speak when I tell you to speak." Ryan went still. Grace felt her heartbeat against her ribs. She could have stopped there. She could have named Ryan and protected herself from the greater danger. Instead, she looked at Marcus. Ryan followed orders. Marcus's jaw tightened. Caleb's expression changed again. Whose orders? Grace forced herself not to look away. "Alpha Vale's." A low murmur moved through the hall. Marcus raised his chin. "This is absurd. She trespassed in restricted areas, stole medicine, and sent false accusations to the crown. She is trying to protect herself. Then prove it," Caleb said. Marcus blinked. Caleb took 1 step toward him. "Show me the inventory records. Open the warehouse. Bring every account book connected to the crown shipments into this hall." Marcus hesitated. It lasted less than a second, but Grace saw it. So did Caleb. Ryan's hand moved toward the weapon at his side. Royal guards immediately shifted between him and the king. Caleb's wolf surged close to the surface. His shoulders tightened. The silver cup on the table behind him finally split and fell onto its side. Grace felt the force of his anger without understanding why it seemed to sharpen whenever he looked at her. Caleb stepped toward Marcus again. "If she is lying, the records will prove it. If she is telling the truth..." He did not finish. He did not need to. Marcus's face had gone pale. Grace suddenly understood what was happening. Caleb was 1 breath away from letting instinct make the next decision. She had spent years watching powerful men use anger as permission. She could not let justice become another version of that. Before fear could stop her, Grace reached out. Her fingers closed around Caleb Sterling's wrist. The entire hall froze. So did the king. For 1 strange heartbeat, the fury inside him went quiet. Caleb stared at Grace's hand around his wrist. For 1 impossible second, the great hall disappeared beneath the sudden stillness inside him. His wolf had been pressing against his control only moments before, restless and furious, yet now it had gone quiet, not subdued, listening. Caleb looked at Grace, searching her face for an explanation she clearly did not have. Realizing what she had done, Grace released him at once. "Forgive me." Caleb barely heard the words. Something faint lingered in the air between them, almost like a scent he could not place, warm cedar after rain. Then it was gone. Grace drew a careful breath. "Please do not punish them because you are angry." Marcus looked almost relieved. Caleb was not. "You are asking me to spare them? No." Grace lifted her eyes. Her voice was soft, but it did not shake this time. "I am asking you to let me prove what they did." The room fell silent again. "If you punish them because of what happened to me, tomorrow they will say I survived because the king favored an Omega. They will say the evidence never mattered." Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then the amber faded from his eyes. When he turned toward his guards, his voice had returned to its usual cold precision. "Seal every gate. No one leaves Frost Hollow. Secure the warehouse, the records room, and every account connected to Crown Supplies. Nothing is removed, nothing is destroyed." Marcus stepped forward. "Your Majesty, surely that is unnecessary." Caleb looked at him. "You should hope it is." Royal guards moved at once. Grace swayed slightly, and Caleb noticed. "You need the infirmary. Clara first." He frowned. "Who is Clara?" "An 8-year-old Omega. She has a fever. She is the reason I opened the ledger." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Grace had risked everything not for revenge, not for rank, but because a sick child had been denied medicine that already belonged to her. Caleb turned to Doc. "Evelyn Hart, the royal healer who had traveled with his party. See to the child, then examine Grace." Evelyn nodded and left immediately with 2 guards. Grace finally allowed herself to sit near the edge of the hall while the investigation began. Less than 20 minutes later, boots sounded in the corridor. A royal guard entered carrying a wooden crate stamped with the crown seal. "Your Majesty, the warehouse is full. Medicine, blankets, food stores, far more than the official report lists." Marcus's face drained of color. Another guard followed, holding several dark glass bottles. These were stored separately. Every bottle is labeled as Omega Calming Tonic. Grace looked up. She knew those bottles. She had swallowed that bitter liquid every evening since she was 16. Dr. Hart returned from the infirmary and took one from the guard. She uncorked it, smelled the contents, then touched a single drop to a testing strip from her medical case. Her expression hardened. Caleb noticed immediately. What is it? Evelyn looked first at Grace, then at the rows of frightened Omegas gathered near the rear of the hall. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, "this is not calming medicine." Dr. Evelyn Hart held the dark bottle beneath the hall lights and turned it slowly between her fingers. "This contains Silverroot." A murmur moved through the room. Grace knew the name, but only as something healers used in tiny doses when a wolf became dangerously unstable during a difficult shift. Evelyn looked at her. "How long have you been taking this tonic?" Grace swallowed. "Since I was 16. Evelyn's face tightened. "Every day." Grace nodded. The royal healer set the bottle down carefully. "In controlled amounts, Silverroot can calm a severe shift response. Taken for years, it can weaken a wolf's instincts, dull scent, increase fatigue, and make shifting far more difficult." Grace stared at the bottle. 7 years. 7 years of wondering why her wolf felt distant. 7 years of believing weakness belonged to her. Caleb's attention sharpened. "How many Omegas were given this?" No one answered at first. Then an older woman near the back raised her hand. Another followed. then another. Soon nearly every Omega in the hall was standing in silence. Marcus stepped forward. It was a medical program, nothing more. Then you will have records authorizing it, Caleb said. Marcus did not answer. A royal guard entered carrying 3 account books recovered from the records room. Your Majesty, the shipment numbers match the information sent by Grace Miller. Crown medicine was received here, then transferred under private merchant codes. Grace watched Marcus's composure begin to fracture. He pointed at her. She fabricated those numbers. Grace slowly stood. Her legs still felt weak, but her voice did not. No! She reached down to the hem of her dress. Marcus frowned. Ryan's expression changed first. Grace found the small line of stitches she had sewn with her own hands and pulled them free. A folded sheet of paper slipped into her palm. She opened it carefully. I copied the entries before I sent the message. Caleb took the page, compared it with the recovered records, then handed it to one of his investigators. The man checked 3 entries before looking up. They match. Marcus went pale. Grace barely heard the whispers around her. Her attention had returned to the Silverroot bottle. Was my wolf always weak? She asked. Evelyn's expression softened. I do not think anyone in this room can answer what your wolf was meant to become. But I can tell you this. What you felt was not entirely natural. The words landed harder than Grace expected. Anger came first, then grief. Not because she had lost power. Because someone had taught her to mistake what had been done to her for who she was. Evelyn prepared a counteragent and explained that recovery would take time. Hours for the active Silverroot to begin clearing. Weeks, perhaps months, for Grace's body and wolf to recover. Grace drank it. Nothing miraculous happened, no sudden strength, no magical transformation. But sometime later, as evening light turned gold against the hall windows, Caleb stopped in the middle of a sentence. A scent had reached him, faint, almost hidden. Cedar warmed by rain, wildflowers after a storm, the same impossible trace he had sensed when Grace touched his wrist. His wolf rose inside him, not with rage this time, but recognition. Caleb looked at Grace. She looked back, startled by the sudden change in his face. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Marcus saw it too. Panic stripped away the last of his restraint. It changes nothing, he said. His voice cracked across the hall. She was born in Frost Hollow. She belongs to this pack. She is Frost Hollow property. The words hung in the great hall like something rotten. Grace felt every wolf turn toward her, waiting to see what the king would do. Caleb did not raise his voice. He did not bare his teeth. Somehow, that made Marcus look even smaller. Caleb stepped between them and faced the alpha of Frost Hollow. She belongs to no man. Marcus opened his mouth, but Caleb continued. Not to you, not to this pack, not even to me unless she chooses it. Grace forgot to breathe. For years, every rule in Frost Hollow had told her that someone else would decide where she lived, what she swallowed, when she spoke, and how much pain she was expected to endure quietly. Caleb had the power to claim her in front of everyone. Instead, he gave that power back to her. The royal investigators finished reviewing the records before sunset. The evidence was no longer one frightened Omega against an alpha. Shipment numbers matched. Private merchant payments matched. The hidden supplies matched the crown records. The Silverroot bottles matched years of unexplained weakness among Frost Hollow Omegas. Marcus Vale was removed from command, pending royal judgment. Ryan Cross was detained for his part in threatening witnesses and carrying out Marcus's orders. Neither man was allowed to leave Frost Hollow. Caleb ordered the stolen wealth seized and returned to the people it had been taken from. Medicine went first to the infirmary. Food and winter blankets followed. Grace did not stay to watch Marcus lose his title. She went to Clara. The little girl was awake when Grace entered the infirmary, pale but no longer burning with fever. "Mama Grace," she whispered. Grace crossed the room so quickly that the chair beside the bed nearly tipped over. She took Clara's hand and pressed it between both of hers. "I am here." Clara gave her a tired smile. "Did you find the medicine?" Grace's throat tightened. "Yes, I knew you would." That simple trust broke something open inside her. Grace lowered her head and cried for the first time since Ryan had taken her from the square. Not from fear, not from pain, from relief. Later, after Clara fell asleep, Grace found Caleb waiting alone in the moonlit courtyard. He had removed his royal coat. Without the guards and the throne behind him, he looked less like a legend and more like a man trying very carefully not to frighten someone who had already been frightened enough. "Your wolf knows," Grace said softly. Caleb nodded. "So does yours, eventually. And what happens now?" He surprised her by lowering himself to one knee, not to claim her, not to command her. "Now you choose." Grace stared at him. Caleb told her she could leave Frost Hollow, stay under crown protection, join the Royal Healing Council, or disappear somewhere no one knew her name. She could accept the mate bond. She could refuse it. "Whatever you decide," he said, "no one will own you again." Grace looked at the man fate had placed before her and realized fate was not making the decision. She was. "Then give me time." Caleb rose slowly. "All of it." Grace watched him walk away beneath the silver moon. And for the first time in her life, freedom did not feel empty. It felt like an open road. She only had to decide whether that road would carry her away from Caleb Sterling or one day lead her back to him. Months passed, and Grace discovered that healing was quieter than survival. Frost Hollow changed slowly, but this time the change was real. The forced Omega tonic disappeared. Royal supplies were counted in public. The infirmary shelves stayed full. Omegas who had spent years believing their weakness was natural received treatment from Dr. Evelyn Hart and her team. Marcus Vale lost his position permanently and faced royal judgment for corruption and abuse of authority. Ryan Cross answered for the choices he had made under Marcus's command. Grace did not spend those months waiting for Caleb. She rebuilt her own life. Her wolf returned gradually, first as a faint warmth beneath her ribs, then as a steady presence she could finally recognize as her own. She helped establish Grace House, a healing center where rank never decided who deserved medicine. Clara recovered completely and became the loudest child in the building, which Grace considered proof of excellent health. Caleb visited Frost Hollow, but he never arrived demanding an answer. Sometimes he brought medical books. Sometimes he brought Clara stories from the capital. Sometimes he simply sat with Grace beneath the old cedar trees and listened. He never asked when she would accept the bond. Nearly 1 year after the day everything changed, Frost Hollow gathered for the Moon Festival. Lanterns glowed across the square. Music drifted between the buildings. Grace entered, wearing a simple silver blue dress, her chestnut hair loose over her shoulders. No guards escorted her. No alpha summoned her. At the far end of the hall, Caleb saw her and became completely still. Grace walked through the crowd until she stood before him. "The first time I stood in front of you," she said, "someone else brought me there." Caleb's expression softened. Grace held out her hand. "This time, I came because I chose to." He took her hand carefully. "And what are you choosing to?" Grace smiled. "You." Caleb closed his eyes for one brief moment, as if those 3 letters carried more power than any crown he had ever worn. When he opened them again, he asked for her consent before completing the mate bond. Grace gave it freely. The bond settled between them like warmth after a long winter. Not a chain, but a promise. Later, when Caleb presented the Luna crown, he did not place it on her head. He handed it to Grace. she lifted it herself. Clara pushed through the crowd and looked up at her. "Does this mean I have to call you Queen, Grace?" Grace laughed. Caleb leaned down. "Only when she's angry with you." Clara considered that. "Then I am definitely sticking with Grace." For the first time that night, the entire hall laughed together. And maybe that was the real ending Grace had earned. Not becoming powerful enough to frighten the people who once ignored her, but becoming free enough that they could never define her again. I think that is what this story leaves behind. Strength is easy to recognize when it is loud. It is harder to notice when it looks like Grace protecting a sick child, refusing to lie, or asking an angry king to choose justice over revenge. And love means very little when it demands obedience. It becomes meaningful when someone can walk away and still chooses to stay. What do you think mattered more in Grace's journey, finding Caleb or finding her own voice first? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories about courage, second chances, and love built on choice mean something to you, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story.